Hello to you all. We start this week in the company of Nico from 4x4 Project to learn about our shock absorbers, how they work, how to fix them and how to service them.
The most common type of shock absorbers are monotube and twin tube. What you used to have was a twin tube shock, and this inner tube is filled with oil. It has an opening down here which I didn't draw correctly, so the oil extends into the outer chamber and the oil level reaches more or less somewhere there. And here you got air or nitrogen, depending. They always have to run upside down or in the correct direction. Let's put it that way. It's not called upside down. And usually you don't see the shaft because they have a big dust cover here, which could be metal, could be plastic. They always have to be in this position. Why? Because if you turn this around, all right, all the oil would go here. The air charge would go up here, and suddenly your piston will be running through half air, half oil, which you don't want because the piston needs to run through oil. Okay. In the twin tube piston shock, we have a rather small piston on the inside. That's why when people say, well, my shocks are this thick, so they say, well, in a twin tube, your shock might be this thick, but you don't know what's on the inside. So unless you cut it up and you look at what's inside, you don't know what kind of piston you're working with. Advantages of a twin tube shock absorber are they're rather affordable to produce. So that's why all these, I want to say, very cheap shocks you see on the market are always twin tubes, because it's the cheapest shock in terms of production. Another advantage they have is they have a little advantage in terms of suspension travel if you compare them one to one. We'll get to that later. The big disadvantage is here is, I'm going to say air or nitrogen is N2, right? Well, air or nitrogen. But it is a very low pressure charge. So this means that my oil is not under pressure. So once the shock absorber starts working, it's like shaking a can of milk that's half full, or a can of water and soap. It'll start foaming up. And once it foams up, my oil does not offer enough resistance anymore to flow. So the shock absorber loses its function. It gets very soft. It just doesn't do its function until I stop, let it cool down for, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 minutes, whatever it takes. And then they will be back at their function. Now we go back to the monotube shock absorber. So from the outside, they might look the same, but in the monotube shock absorber, you have your same piston rod going in. You have only one tube, that's why it's called a monotube. And you have a piston that covers, which will be this here, that covers the whole diameter of the shock absorber. Okay. Now you have oil here, oil there, and you have what you call a dividing piston. And then you got here, for you on the other side, here will be nitrogen. You have a nitrogen chamber here. This nitrogen chamber is loaded up at a relatively high pressure. Depends a bit on the shock absorber brand and design. Ours, for example, well, this one not because it's empty, but the ones on Purdey are pre-charged at 200 psi. Okay, you always need a flexible element, okay, because when you're putting the piston rod in, it doesn't matter if it's a twin tube or monotube. You need a flexible element because obviously you're putting more volume of material into this limited size shock absorber. And that's where the nitrogen chamber or the air chamber act as a cushion. Okay. So the good thing here is when I put a liquid, it doesn't matter if it's oil, if it's water, if it's water and soap, under pressure, it'll take much longer to foam up. Okay. And that's where this becomes interesting, because now I have my oil, which is under constant pressure from this nitrogen precharge up here. So I can shake it with my piston for a much longer time before it starts foaming up. Okay, so that's the advantage. A monotube shock absorber will deliver a steady performance for a longer time. Okay, that's why any shock absorber that's aimed at performance or high performance is generally a monotube shock absorber. Look. Disadvantages of the monotube shock absorber is obviously I need to work much better on my sealing, because suddenly my seal pack is not starting with zero pressure, but it's starting with 200 psi of pressure when doing nothing. Okay. Now you go jumping it over dunes, so obviously the pressure peaks in here will be much, much higher. So the seal pack needs to be really well thought out. So that's one of the disadvantages. That's why manufacturing monotube shock absorbers usually is more expensive, because you need to use higher quality seals and a higher quality shaft guidance, because obviously if your shaft has a little bit of play, the seal can be as good as it wants to, but you know, if there's play, it's never going to seal. Okay. So this brings us back to, that's why having an intact piston rod is very important, because if my seals are excellent, but my piston rod has scratches or dings, the seal will not be able to seal. Okay. That's why in racing we usually place the monotube shock absorbers in this position. Okay. So whatever comes here can just fall out. This also has one advantage. I'm reducing my unsprung weight. Unsprung weight is all the weight that moves up and down. So obviously if I place a shock absorber like this, the piston rod is attached to the frame and all the shock body needs to go up and down every time the suspension cycles. So this is more weight that I'm moving up and down versus if I'm placing it this way, the shock body is fixed to the frame and I'm only moving the piston rod. Okay. One of the disadvantages of the monotube shock absorbers, besides the more complex sealing, is with the same size of shock absorber, I'm more limited on suspension travel, because obviously this piston rod will never be able to travel all the way here because I have my dividing piston and I cannot compress my nitrogen chamber infinitely. So usually you would say on this size of shock absorber, monotube versus twin tube, the monotube will have around 20 to 30 millimeters less suspension travel, so an inch to an inch and a half. And but there's ways around it. One way around it, you can cheat, is very easy, just using an external reservoir. Okay? So what we do is this same shock absorber, we add a fitting here, and now you can add a hose or a piggyback or whatever. Let's say we add a hose, okay, and we place a reservoir here. So with this solution here, we have a much larger nitrogen chamber, and that's why we use these oversized reservoirs. So our nitrogen chamber is essentially this big, okay? Whereas if we didn't have the reservoir, it would be just this big. So by giving it a larger nitrogen chamber, we're giving our seals an easier life, which adds to the durability of them or to extending their lifetime, and also we're creating less heat. We're going to take it apart and put it back together so that you see what you need to do if you do. We have the Heim joints or spherical joints, whatever you want to call them. These are Teflon lined, which means even if a little bit of dirt gets in them, they usually don't make noises. If you need to replace them, they're very easy. They're held on with this C-clip. To take your shock absorber apart, the first step is we have a high pressure nitrogen charge in here, so you will take off this cap. Okay. So first thing, you would take off that cap. All right. Now you would just take your Allen key screwdriver, press on here, let the 200 psi out. Now you would take off this bracket if it was a rear shock. On the front you'd have the hose, so you want to have that. You need your 5 millimeter if I'm correct. These will be a bit tighter because in real life, well, they're torqued down and they have Loctite on them, okay? But still, for sure. So now you take a 3 millimeter Allen key and release these. Again, these will be a bit tighter because they have Loctite on them, so you don't lose them. This all now slides in because it's loose, obviously. Normally it will. And take that C-clip out. Alright? And you will push this housing out. So now it's very easy because we don't have a seal. Here usually there's an O-ring that will make pressure against the side. We'll take it out slowly because there's oil above the piston and needs to flow through the piston, otherwise you're just spilling all of that. The most common leak, if you have wear and tear, is in the seal pack here. Ideally, you'd be working with rubber gloves or very clean hands. You take the valve stack off and you take it off like this. Okay. There will be about 10 to 12 shims on each side, and you take it off like this because you do not want to mix up the shims. You'd have this on your bench vise or lying flat. I just pull this one out. That actually has the seals in them, so that's a realistic resistance. And you've all seen that we didn't use many special tools to take this apart.
No, that's amazing.
That's the philosophy behind it. Okay. One thing I did not show you: you will have a piston band that is wrapped against your piston. Okay. And what this does is it keeps the piston from rubbing against the shock body. So let's have a look at the piston. That's a 60 millimeter monotube piston. If you open up your standard different brand twin tube shock absorber or even a Bilstein twin tube shock absorber, you see a piston that is this size. Bigger doesn't mean stronger necessarily, but bigger means more potential for high flow because obviously the holes and the passages are bigger. Okay. With a bigger piston, I can use a bigger diameter shim stack. And the good thing about it is I can generate much more comfort. So what's interesting about this, I get the high resistance for the low movement. And I hope you've noticed that Purdey is somewhat more stable around corners than it used to be before in the other suspension. I've not driven with you, and I've not asked you, so this is live, so I hope we didn't prepare for this. But at the same time, now we have a high piston velocity, and since the curve, this is a bit exaggerated now, but just for the extension, but since the curve flattens out, I'm at a good point here, I'm not up here. And that's something I can only achieve with a digressive piston. And we only work with digressive pistons in our pre-runner shocks because of this, because we say, hey, we want a good body roll control, good stability around corners and around fast corners, but at the same time we want a comfortable shock absorber setting once we're at higher piston velocities, single washboards, okay? So you put in a few drops back in, you would reassemble your piston rod. I'll let you do that. Obviously all these seals, if you put a bit of grease on them or oil, they're gonna slide in better, okay? I'll do it in pieces because obviously we did not put the zip tie through it and so on, so just take brake cleaner, degreaser, whatever, properly degrease the thread. Okay. So you would put this back on. And you just slide it up. Alright? Alright. And this piston is a different type of piston. I mean, you can see it. It has a different thickness. Yeah. And also the design of the face is different. Okay, that's just because this piston has different flow characteristics. Okay. We call it self-adjusting, but we do not call it automatic because there's no automation to it. There's no sensors, no wires, no adjusting valves, nothing. It's just hydraulics. You don't have to think about, well, how am I adjusting the vehicle for this track today? Well, you're not adjusting, you just go and drive. Slowly slide this in, and before the seal reaches this edge, you need a little bit of oil overflow, because now we can calmly do the rest. So you will put your circlip again in there, that you don't get a false reading, and you want to have it a little bit higher in the rear than in the front. Okay, when you measure here, you're about 10 to 20 millimeters higher than in the front. Okay. Not too much, because if you exaggerate in the vehicles like this, it will want to dive into holes, and you don't want that. Okay.
What's in that green book?
This one, that's got wheel bearings, stub axle seals, and hub seals.
Yeah, I can take that.
Will that fit?
Look at that.
Yeah, I'm still lifting.
Yeah. Just.
It's quite heavy. Heavy at this end.
Yeah.
Right. Box 0. So now.
Cut down the cardboard a bit.
Yeah, and then that can stand up, can't it?
Yes.
So there we have it. Our spares boxes are more or less packed. We have a diff that doesn't fit in the box. It's really heavy anyway, so it's best that it goes separately, and one of the half shafts doesn't fit in, so that's labelled to go separately. This is the other box right here, so that's all ready. That's our first frost of the season this morning. Just if you can see the ice crystals glistening on Delilah's window. Look at the ice on the roof. But Purdey's okay because she's just under the cover in the garage. Just draining her oil for an oil change ahead of going to Barcelona. We're kind of running out of space today, but we thought we ought to just check that our home from home, our rally home from home, actually works with the beds in. So we've put the tent up sort of. I'm going to waterproof it in a minute and put the 2 camp beds up. I think it's all right, actually. We've got room in here, and we can get our stuff underneath the bed, and yeah, should be okay. Having checked our stuff fits in the tent, I've got some waterproofing spray. Now, I know you're all going to go, oh well, it's the desert, it's not going to be wet, but it can be, and when it's wet, it's wet. And we've had this tent a while now, so what I thought I ought to do is give it some coats of waterproofing spray, just to make sure if it does rain that we don't get wet. We've got the right size pieces of mousse for the roll cage, but they still don't really seem to fit on very well, but we think they're just a little bit too long. Let's just try that up again. I don't know if it's holding off on the... What do you think?
I think we've got to cut a bit out of that.
We'll cut the whole of the end off.
No, cut at an angle to match that.
With the mousse all in place onto the roll cage, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Simon to say that we did listen to your comment and we secured the shackles, but we still have stickering to do for the final sponsors on Purdey, so we move on to that. So as well as putting stickers on, we've got to take these Santana ones off, which is a bit of a shame because it was a good event, but we're going to get Dakar ones on the doors, so these ones have to go. However, Santana trophy is still represented on the car. I'm up on Purdey's roof. Actually, it's the first time I've ever been up here. Which is unusual because I quite like sitting on Land Rover roofs. So what I'm trying to do, we have this big logo which is from Marcella's business, which is called Deja Vu, and this is the big eye, all-seeing eye. My problem with putting this sticker on is that we've got this spar running down the middle of the roof, so if I put it on and just bend it round, then it'll all be out of line. So I've cut a strip out the middle, the size of the top of the spar, and now all I've got to do is line all of this up, which is why I've put this mark across here, and get it all stuck on. Just in case we get any drone or helicopter shots, you'll see the Deja Vu logo. We're getting through the sticker, but my knee's hurting, so just using this kneeling pad from our partners at Teng Tools is very good. The last bit, which I think I've got lined up, let's go for it. And that's the end of another week. Next week we're off to Barcelona, so I'm leaving you in my office because I've got some paperwork to do, customs forms and so forth. Thank you for watching once again. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button if you're able, and we'll see you next week on the road to Barcelona.